afternoon and welcome to our HPL webinar for today. I'm real excited that we have our guest speaker. His name is Bob Foley. He's one of the service industry's most respected and versatile HR and training executives. He brings a portfolio of experience that includes 4 years as a president and CEO of a noted franchised hotel chain, 3 years in a similar capacity heading up a National Association's Educational Institute, and over 30 years as a tried and tested HR executive, where he brought a high-touch cultural feel through innovative electronic solutions. In a world of speedy transaction, he always integrates the need for relational connections while keeping the business on the move. Today we'll be talking about conflict resolution, and I'm glad that we've got an expert to lead us for the charge. Bob, welcome to our call.
All righty. So it looks like what we're going to talk about today are objectives for resolving conflict. And we're going to start with understanding the elements of conflict, and then move on to recognizing conflict management styles, followed by tips for handling conflict, managing organizational conflict, identifying causes of conflict management, and then reasons for managing organizational conflict. All right, let's talk about understanding the elements of conflict. We're going to do a little role play, if you will, and we're going to talk about Dave and Sally, who work in the same department. Dave is a new employee. Sally has worked at the company for 20 years. They both do the same job and have the same job title. Sally likes to do things the way they've always been done and is very vocal because she has been there so long. She thinks she knows how to do everything. David tries hard to follow company rules. David is a very quiet man. He doesn't talk much. He has conservative and traditional values. And employees must clock in within 5 minutes of the start of their shifts. They're supposed to clock at their own buildings, but there isn't any way to check this. Sally always clocks in at another building, so she won't be marked as tardy. She always gets to her workstation at least 10 minutes late. At least a couple of times each week, somebody asks David where Sally is. David is tired of covering for Sally. He has kept in it for a long time. Finally, one morning, Sally is 20 minutes late. David has to cover for Sally 2 times. When Sally finally appears, David tells her he's not going to cover for her any longer. Sally says, "Hey, I clocked in. I've been doing this for years. As long as you don't say anything, nobody will ever know. Just shut up and do your job." Sally and David start shouting at each other. The team leader walks in just as it looks like Sally is going to hit David. Well, that certainly brings us to our next point here, which is, what are the causes of conflict? And with that, what we find is there's a lack of communication, a lack of common understanding, poor communication, and unclear or unfair expectations. Conflict can occur when individuals differ in their perception on an issue or a situation. People desire different outcomes, and one person doesn't feel listened to or understood by another. Disruptive conflict is brought about by competition, self-interest, or a win-lose approach. Constructive conflict can help us by letting us know that people aren't afraid to speak their minds. It helps us to clear the air and lets us know that we're hearing all sides of the issue. Constructive conflict results include cooperation, collective focus, and a win-win approach. Now, let's review what we've just kind of gone through. On one side is the constructive approach. On the other side is the destructive approach. So, On the constructive side, it raises and clarifies issues, whereas on the destructive side, it brings up old issues. On the constructive side, both positive and negative feelings are expressed, while on the destructive side, only negative feelings are expressed. On the constructive side, complete and honest information. On the destructive side, only selective information. On the conflict side, on the constructive side, conflict is issue-oriented, not personal. On the destructive side, conflict focuses on the person rather than the issue. We also see on the constructive side that we have accept mutual blame. On the destructive side, it's blame the other person for the problem. On the constructive side, it's focus on similarities. On the destructive side, it's blame the other person for the problem and focus on the differences. On the constructive side, it's facilities change to prevent stagnation, and on the destructive side, it minimizes change, increases conflict. On the constructive side, both win or both lose. On the destructive side, one wins and one loses. On the constructive side, resolving conflict increases intimacy, and on the destructive side, escalating conflict decreases intimacy. Constructive approach, finally, has a trusting factor with it, but on the destructive side, it has a suspicious nature to it. So as you can see, there is a positive side and a negative side. Many times with conflict, we end up on the negative. What we want to try and do is end up on the positive. Now, let's understand the elements of conflict simulation. Like stress, conflict is inevitable. It can be positive or negative. Constructive conflict will equal focused work. Disruptive conflict will equal resistance. Discomfort with conflict lessens with common positive steps to manage. Now, there are 5 conflict management styles. And let me take a minute here to go over what the 5 are, and then we'll get into discussions about that. First of all, there's collaboration, followed by competition, then compromise, avoidance, and finally, accommodation. Let's talk about collaboration first. And collaboration is more known as problem solving in the daily vernacular. So problem solving looks at high concern for self, high concern for others. You redefine the problem. You find creative solutions. It's a win-win outcome, and it maintains a good relationship. Collaboration is very good because problem solving helps things to move along and helps things to get on the right track. When it's competition, we're in a win-lose approach. So there's a very high concern for self and a low concern for others. Obviously, if you're being selfish and self-centered, that does not bode well for any kind of organizational programming. Competition is also disruptive when it comes to a style of conflict management. It's a win-at-all-costs type of thing, and sometimes this style ruins relationships rather than helps it. Compromise. Let's split the difference. It's a medium concern for self and a medium concern for others. The pie is limited. The best solution is to divide the pie. Win-win is not possible, however. Win-lose has too many negatives, and everybody wins and loses something. It is just not a good place to be. Avoidance. Well, that's our passive-aggressive approach. It has a low concern for self, a low concern for others. Avoidance produces non-involvement. It's the most frequently used style, and it's also the most ineffective style and leads to further problems. In the day-to-day business life, we see that the passive-aggressive behavior of individuals is used more than any other. And as you can see, what it produces is non-involvement, which is not good for trying to solve anything, especially something that's conflictive. We have accommodation. That's considered weakness because you have a low concern for self, a high concern for others. You're keeping a good relationship is the most important thing. That's the motivating factor. And excessive use of this style can lead to being taken advantage of. It's just not a good place to be. So what are the tips for handling conflict? Well, we're going to talk about unfair fighting, fair fighting, threats, good listening, and clear messaging. Let's start with unfair fighting. First of all, it's bad timing. Second of all, it really centers around trying to point the finger at someone else and blaming them. We also then try to heap on the issues. There's just too many of them. And the reason why we do all of this is because we have a fear of losing our power. And finally, it shifts attention to others away from ourselves. You've heard the expression that somebody likes to start fires over in the corner so that they can't be seen as the instigator. These are all unfair things, and this is why we call this an unfair fight. Now, let's go to the other side of the coin, which is fair fighting. Well, what does that do? It reduces or eliminates personal threat. It helps us to state the problem, to find common ground, to stick to one issue at a time. It helps us describe our feelings, evaluate alternatives, and we finally end either in agreement, counterproposal, or postponement. All three things can be a positive when we're talking about a conflictive situation. And this is why we consider this fair fighting. Now, what do threats and ultimatums do for us? Well, first of all, it increases ill will. Second, it hampers the path to solution. It's the roadblock to solution. It escalates negativity. When we're dealing with conflict, negativity is the thing that seeps into the discussion more times than not. And if we're in a position where we're doing something that will escalate that negativity, that's not good for anybody. And then finally, it focuses energy on the fight rather than on the solution. In other words, we tend to lead with emotion rather than logic. Good listening. Less is more during stressful times. Let's put emotion aside and listen to the content of the other side's statements. Very, very important. Very important that we understand what the message is that they're trying to get to us. And finally, we need to evaluate on our feet and be ready with a thoughtful response. In other words, if we're in a conflictive situation, things get more focused, things get more intense, and we better be ready with our response that's well thought out and that is something that will help the other person or persons to understand exactly where we're coming from. That's why listening is as important as speaking. And speaking of speaking, let's talk about clear messaging. Don't ask questions when you need to make a statement. That is a great technique of deflection. Send consistent messages. Avoid double meanings. In other words, don't be the kind of person that sends messages that could be taken either way. Be clear about your wants and desires. Distinguish between observations and thoughts. And finally, focus on one thing at a time. Many times in messaging, what happens, especially in an escalating situation or conflictive situation, what we tend to do is bring every issue that we can and throw them on the table as fast as possible and then run away. Well, the big thing is to focus on one thing at a time so that, first of all, people are being listened to and understood. But at the same time, once you focus on one thing, you can move on to another. You can resolve it and move on to another. All right. We're going to talk now in what I feel is probably the most interesting and probably, hopefully, the biggest thing that you'll get out of today's webinar, which is the whole fact of managing organizational conflict, especially when you have to deal with difficult people. And this is the core and the crux of what happens in resolving conflict, is that you have to deal with difficult people. So what we're going to do is we're going to take you through a number of scenarios and give you some ways in which you can be successful in dealing with difficult people. Let's start first of all with the steamroller. You will do it my way. The best strategy with a steamroller is to be assertive, because many times what happens is a steamroller is just that. It's going to flatten you out, roll over you, go right past you. But if you're assertive, then what happens is that slows the steamroller down. And the whole idea about doing it my way is put on hold. We move on then to the nitpicker. It's still not right. The best strategy to dealing with a nitpicker is don't accept everything they say. Set realistic expectations for the task at hand. So in other words, if the nitpicker is always the naysayer, the negative one, etc., remember, it takes two to tango. And as it takes two to tango, the whole thing is that the nitpicker cannot continue their negativity unless the other person engages them. So don't accept everything they say, and take what they're saying and say, let's try and set realistic expectations for the task at hand. The obstructionist. I liked it the way it was. Here's the best strategy to deal with an obstructionist. Be clear and honest about any change. If possible, allow the obstructionist to participate in plans for change. And that is one thing in today's work world that we see that is a constant, and that is change. And the best way to make change meaningful and sustainable is to take that person and make them part of the solution. Make them part of the plan for the change. Because if you try to ignore them, they're just going to completely shut down, and they're going to continue to say, I liked it the way it was. I didn't sign up for that. It's not in my job, man. The best strategy is clearly explain your need for their assistance. This will make them feel involved. Look for opportunities for this person to attend additional training. This whole idea about the rejection of what they're being asked to do because it's not my job is something that seeps through organizations all the time. So let's be clear to explain to them why we need their assistance, even to the point that they feel as though their assistance is very important to this whole project. And that will make them feel involved, and hopefully that will make them part of the solution again, rather than part of the problem. The gossip monger. This is the one thing, or the one attribute that we see time and time again. Have you heard the latest? The best strategy for dealing with "have you heard the latest" is make sure clear information and facts reach everyone in the organization. Encourage coworkers not to take their statements at face value. The thing about the gossip monger is they love to tell tall tales because that makes them important in the organization, and their communication and what they communicate can be very damaging to an organization because, well, it's probably not true or not completely true. And what that does is it creates tension and it creates doubt in the minds of associates. And it just isn't good. It just isn't good communication. So basically, make sure that when you are communicating, you're giving clear information so that the facts that everyone is hearing are the facts that people can hold on to. The defeatist. The sky is falling. Everything is terrible. I don't know why I continue to work here. The best strategy for dealing with the defeatist is to encourage specific positive habits. Model optimistic thinking and approaches to find solutions. To be an optimist and to approach things from a positive standpoint is the best way to deal with the defeatist. Because if the defeatist does not have allies, guess what? They join the other side. Because if everyone is being positive, they, as a defeatist, have no platform. The slacker. Later, dude. Establish specific goals and expectations so they can't slack. Set routine update meetings to monitor their progress. The one thing that the slacker hates more than anything else is to be held accountable. And the more you hold a slacker accountable, the less they slack. So if you have a mañana mentality going on within your department or within your company, make sure that you establish specific goals and expectations and set routine update meetings to monitor their progress. It really works. The fault finder. You know that guy who's always out there saying, I disagree. They always want to see the other side of the coin no matter what it is, and it doesn't matter. And what it does is it slows everything down. People get frustrated. People roll their eyes. People stop listening. So what are the best strategies to deal with the fault finder? Well, ask for the reasoning behind their disagreement. Acknowledge their concerns, but be persistent. Mostly what we find with the fault finder is they continue to do these things just to get attention to themselves. And because of that, what happens is the entire organization becomes less effective because time is spent where it doesn't necessarily need to be spent. So again, if the fault finder is always disagreeing, ask them for the reasoning behind that disagreement and then acknowledge the concerns, but be persistent. The whiner. Nobody cares about me. It's the Gilbert Gottfried syndrome. So what's the best strategy to deal with him? Well, emphasize the whiner's strengths and contributions and give frequent words of encouragement so they can't be always whining about how nobody cares about me. The martyr. I have given up everything and nobody cares. I have given up all and nobody cares. The martyr act we see time and time again. So what are the best strategies to deal with martyrs? Give positive feedback on their contributions and hard work. Give praise in front of others so that the martyr has no way to continue to be the martyr. The self-criticizer. I can't believe I'm doing that. The thing about I can't believe I'm doing that, again, is it's a time waster. And it takes away from the productivity of the group. So when you have somebody like that, try to help them build up their self-esteem. Present evidence of good work that this person has produced. And look, everybody at one point or another, no matter what their style is, they do produce something positive. So with a self-criticizer, present evidence of good work that this person has produced. The blamer. It's not my fault. It's so-and-so's fault. How many times do we hear that? And that's the thing that really galls people. And that kind of deflection and that kind of finger pointing, that's where things can get really out of hand and escalate, and that's where conflict can really become a negative. So what's the best strategy to dealing with the blamer? Well, give specific examples of the blamer's errors or mistakes. Be persistent in keeping the focus on the blamer's errors or mistakes. By doing that, what you do is you rob them of their power. You take away you take away their ability to say, it's not my fault, it's so-and-so's. Moving on now, we try the person who likes to do the handle with care. I just can't handle it. The best strategy to dealing with the I just can't handle it crowd is give focused feedback in a constructive manner. Encourage the person to restate your point before you move on, and don't rush through the feedback. Allow people to understand what you're saying, to comprehend it, to mull it for a little while, and then to basically come to resolution. So with the people that just can't handle things, again, give focused feedback in a constructive manner. Encourage the person to restate your point before you move on. Give them that chance for affirmation, and what you'll find is your feedback will be much better taken. The person that gets the microscope out, they're always saying, let me double check that. And it gets to the point where it starts to really get annoying. So the best way to deal with the microscope type person is to get that person to look at the big picture, encourage a broader view, and take a look at their overall goals and major problems rather than taking a look at something in a finite way. The microscope person can be very much like the nitpicker. However, they're always self-doubting themselves, and they're always saying, let me double check things. So with that, encourage them to look at the big picture. So those are some of the examples of dealing with certain styles within our area of dealing with difficult people. But let's talk about some general coping strategies that may help you as you go through and deal with these type personalities. So first of all, let's recognize that an attitude problem exists, and acknowledge any underlying causes for that negative attitude. Help the difficult person take responsibility for their actions. That's very important when you're for coping with dealing with difficult people. Now, also, let's replace negative, inappropriate reactions with different or acceptable ones. Instill positive attitudes in others rather than negative. All right, with that, let's move on to our next subject area, better known as identifying causes of organizational conflict. And with that, we're going to talk about change, something that's ongoing in every organization today. Different priorities, how that can create conflict. Poor communication, weak consensus, conflicting goals, and then assumptions. And we know what assumptions do, right? Well, let's talk about, first of all, the contributing factors. Well, the contributing factors are a lack of clarification and definition, a lack of clear roles and responsibilities, power plays and ambition. It happens and it creates such conflict, it can be unbelievable. Inadequate processes and procedures. Disconnect among managers and staff, and competition and diversity. So as you can see, all these contributing factors are the things that befall all of us from time to time. So we need to keep it in the front of our minds so that we understand that if we're good communicators and we really understand what we're saying and how it's perceived, that will help us to be able to resolve certain conflictive situations. Let's talk about now the reasons for managing organizational conflict. Well, the reasons why we're trying to manage it is because of wasted time, reduced decision quality, loss of valuable employees, sabotage, and health costs. We need to create an environment to reduce conflict. So in order to do that, we need to involve employees in organizational decisions. That one thing, involving employees through problem solving or at least through with organizational decisions, is the biggest thing to get buy-in. And most of the reasons why there's conflict in organizations is because there's no buy-in. Because what that also does, it reduces the role ambiguity. It helps people to be able to crystallize and to be able to clearly see the way things are so they don't become ambiguous. And what it also does is it improves communication. How many times have we heard people say, you know, communication around here just isn't good? Now, we also can take a look with the environment and in reducing conflict at developing procedures for managing conflict. In other words, have some kind of grievance procedure. We want to provide support and reward teams for assignment completion. You know, give them the attaboy, give them the pizza party, give them, you know, an extra half hour off, or whatever the right reward system is, and that will eliminate extremes in work overloads, underloads, and misunderstandings, because that's really where most conflictive situations get out of hand. It's through misunderstandings. It's not usually through something that someone does on purpose. It's just because they're either not good communicators or what they're communicating is being misunderstood. In conclusion, the primary reason organizations should focus on conflict is because it has a negative effect on the bottom line. Where does that come from? It comes from wasted time, reduced decision making, a loss of valuable employees, sabotage, and health costs. Resolving conflict improves the bottom line. And in the end, that's why we're all here. We're here to improve the bottom line. So let's focus in on resolving conflict. Thank you very much. Questions?
Well, thank you, Bob. I do have some questions that have come across, and if you don't mind taking a minute and we can answer those.
Sure.
I love the concept of fighting fair, and then I loved all the tidbits that you gave as far as information in dealing with difficult people. But one question that came up was, as an employee in an organization in a submissive role, how do you fight fair or deal with difficult people if, in fact, it is your boss?
Well, that's what happens many times, and many times too. What you have are bosses that lead by fear, and that they always kind of insinuate that there'll be a consequence if you don't go along with what I say. See, the best way to deal with that is to be assertive, is to be assertive with your comments, but don't have a negative tinge or an edge to the comments. Go ahead and be very factual about things. Ask questions that are spot on and that are very germane to the specific area that you're questioning. And at the same time, it is your tone that makes the big difference. If the boss is the kind that's the steamroller type, and if you are assertive with them, but do it in a way that isn't offensive, they have no other choice but to listen to you. And many times what starts to happen is the dawn comes over Marblehead.
Well, and I think that's probably an important aspect for us to look at, and that leads me to my next question. What role do you see mediation playing in conflict resolution in the corporate world?
Well, you know something, that happens almost every single day. And what happens because of passive-aggressive behavior, things start to get very, very tense, and nobody seems to know how to be able to bring parties together or to resolve the situation. That's why a mediator or a meeting to talk the subject through, or if you go back to our earlier our first scenario that we had with Sally and well, our first situation, what happened was when the boss walked in, when Sally was about to clock David, the thing that he or she would have done is to sit both of them down and to get them to talk out their feelings as to why it got to that point. And this whole idea about communication and this whole idea about being able to facilitate meetings like that will help you as a manager to be much more effective. And don't shy away from passive-aggressive people. Move right into them. Be persistent and get to the point where you don't allow them to be passive-aggressive, because passive-aggressive is the thing that I feel is the thing that screws up organizations more than any other factor.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with that. I see that probably happening more often than not, and as a culture we kind of accept that. And that leads me to the last question that I have, and it's what role do you see mastermind groups, what role do they play, what kind of interactivity can occur to help with conflict resolution in the organizational level or in the workplace?
You know, mastermind groups are a great way in which you as an individual can grow by leaps and bounds in the way you solve problems within your organization. When you're in a group of 7 or 8 people that are at the same level and deal with a lot of the same kind of situations that you're dealing with, and when you seek their advice on certain problems that you're having in the workplace and you listen to their perspectives, what starts to happen is you start to receive a level of knowledge that you wouldn't normally receive through training programs, even through other peers at work, because you have people around you that are unbiased, who are not influenced at all by your work environment. So the kind of advice that they're going to give you is unfiltered. It's advice that's very that's very good, and it's also advice that can be very creative. And what it does is it gives you the feeling of confidence that when you go back to the workplace and you decide that you're going to do a certain thing or handle a situation in a certain way, you have the confidence that others do it that way too, and that they have told you how successful they were with that, and that gives you the feeling of confidence that what they have told you is true, and that you can use it as one of your tools in your management tool belt.
Well, yeah, I like that answer too. It's just validation from people that are in the same role you are, and then how you can actually engage the employee. So, yeah, great feedback there. Well, thank you so much for your time. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us. Bob, especially, thank you for bringing your years of knowledge and wisdom to the forefront for us to talk about resolving conflict and dealing with each other in a healthier, more wholesome, more productive way. I do want to let you know that we will have a faculty member, fabulous guy. His name is Dave Williams. We'll be doing our next webinar. That will be November the 19th at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. And he is the president and CEO of the Managers Resource Group. We're excited to have him, and he's going to take us to the next level in regards to employee engagement. So I want to invite each of you to get registered. We'll be sending out some information, and Dave Williams will be our faculty presenter at our November webinar.